Hi there, we're here to discuss the 5 key elements with you. They form a part of our Plus Pilates method, and it's the things that we need to be thinking about when we're exercising in each of the positions that we choose to work in. I'm Jen Redfern, and this is Kate Leeming. So we'll look at standing to begin with. Quite commonly in standing, we tend to favour one leg more so than the other, but we like to stand hip distance apart, and a nice way to achieve that is to start firstly with your feet together, and to then turn out the feet and then bring the heels in line with the toes. Then it's about thinking about where the weight is through your feet. So bring the weight through to the toes, and then bring the weight back into the heels, and maybe try that 2 or 3 times before settling in the mid position, halfway between those two. It can be quite nice to imagine you're stood on 2 little tripods with even weight through the big toe, the little toe, the centre of the heel bone. Or if you prefer a food analogy, then maybe some marshmallows is working better for you. Then think about the weight through your knees and relax the kneecaps. So without shifting the weight through the feet, soften the kneecaps so you don't feel to be fully locking back in and around the knees. Moving northerly to the pelvis, it's important that we think about our neutral spine. So by that, you might like to place your hands onto your pelvis and rock the pelvis back and forth. I'll give you a little side view as well, so that you can imagine that your pelvis is a bucket, perhaps filled with water, sloshing water out the front and the back of the bucket, and then finding the midway point halfway between the two. And at that point, folks, we've turned it into Y, so we want to keep that area nice and steady. So once we've thought about our pelvis and we've maintained the evenness through the feet, the knees up through to there, we might like to think about our centre. So when we're centering, there are 2 ways that we can do that primarily. Firstly, you might like to imagine you have a little belt running from those 2 knobbly bones at the front of the pelvis. And if you were to think about gently securing those, had you had a bigger lunge than normal, then you would be just feeling a little bit of support, a little bit of lift away from the hands on the lower part of your tummy. The other way to think about centering is to engage a little more specifically through your pelvic floor. So thinking about lifting gently through the back passage, through towards the front passage, and gently sustaining that. And the idea would be that you might think about lifting through your out breath, so as you breathe out, and then maintaining that for the duration of your breathing and your exercise. Moving up through towards the rib cage, we need to imagine that our rib cage is sitting directly over our pelvis, rather than a sense of lifting and arching and flaring the rib cage, which might lead to them doing the same through the back. So softening through the rib cage, visualizing 2 little springs, perhaps running from the lower ribs down to the front of the pelvis and keeping them under a gentle tension. It can also be nice just to think about length through the lower back, so you're aware that you're not shortening at the lower end of your spine. Moving up towards your collarbones and around the shoulders, think about being wide across the front of your chest and lifting through the chest bone. Imagine that you have a little light shining straight ahead rather than downwards. That's very good, Kate. And then from there, just a sense of feeling wide across the back of the shoulder blades. So there is no feeling of drawing the shoulder blades back and squeezing them together. That's just not normal for us humans. And finally, thinking about the head and neck. So you might like to think of yourselves as a tortoise for a moment. And if you're a tortoise poking his head out of the shell, that would be a tortoise head or poking chin posture. And then draw back into the shell. And maybe try that a couple of times to get a sense of where you feel is where your norm is, and then finding the midpoint. And then we tend to often talk about a little peach. So imagine you've got a little peach under your chin, you're just trying to hold it in place rather than pureeing it or letting it go. So that's how we cue our 5 key elements in standing. Let's now get down onto all fours position. So all fours, or 4-point kneeling as you might know it, is a really useful place to exercise. It helps to create some good support up around the shoulders and work in what we call a closed chain way. That can give more feedback to the shoulder blades and the shoulders themselves, and also of course the weight bearing benefits that bone loading can offer. So on all fours, it's useful to start with your hands a little way under the shoulder line and the knees approximately under the hips, hip distance apart. If you have difficulties resting on a flat hand, you might like to use your knuckles instead, or you have the option to use something like handles if you may have those at home or can purchase them, and then that just changes the arrangement of your wrist position, and that can be a really positive change. Enables you to exercise here with more comfort. So whilst we're on all fours, it doesn't matter where you start in terms of your 5 key elements, but do think about the orientation of the legs. Think about what's happening around the pelvis, so sinking through the back, sending your body up, tucking under, finding your midway point. It can be helpful to imagine there's a little candle underneath your tummy that's gently warming your tummy there. So this idea of just supporting through a little abdominal lift, and again thinking about that deeper support from the pelvic floor or that lower abdominal contraction we mentioned before. Again, thinking about the shoulder blade placement and the ribs in relation to the rest of your body. So sometimes sinking through the chest bone and squeezing the shoulder blades together, and then lifting through the chest bone and moving the shoulder blades apart, and then finding the midway point can be really, really useful. And then finally thinking about head and neck. It's very common for people to let the head sink forwards, and that often happens alongside the chest bone sinking, so watch out for that. So keep that chest bone lift. Feel to lengthen through the back of the neck, and remember that little peach under your chin again, because that will help to engage your deeper neck flexors, which improves the stability and comfort of your neck and through to your shoulder and arms. Then we come down into our prone position, or our lying on our front position. So when you're using some support under your head, make sure it's just the forehead that you have the support under, so that you're not going to be limiting any breathing potential by squashing your nose onto the floor. And then again, you can start at the head end of the body down to the feet, or the feet up to the head. It really makes no difference. Some people, when they lie on their front, prefer to lay with their legs together. Others prefer their legs apart. Sometimes turning the legs outwards or inwards can be useful. And actually sometimes, if you have a deep curve through your lower back, it can be a little bit uncomfortable or challenging to maintain a more neutral position at your pelvis and low back. So using a little folded towel, or perhaps another little Pilates cushion if you have one, can be a useful way of just taking away some of that challenge. But a useful imagery is to imagine you have a little string on your tailbone, to gently pulling down towards your heels, and that can help to control that lumbar curve, as well as creating a little space under your lower tummy for a row of ladybirds to pass. When we move up, the ribs are almost taken care of, but just giving consideration again to the shoulder blade placement and the front of the shoulders. If your arms are down by your side, then it can be useful to imagine there are 2 little balloons just at the front of the shoulders, supporting, making them a little more buoyant, so that you're not feeling this big rounded curve that you may sometimes find yourself in. And in just thinking about that, you're starting to engage the muscles that support at the back of the shoulders and through the spine. And then finally, through the head and neck, it's useful to just consider that position, and it's very uncommon for you to need more than a very thin slither of folded towel support or a cushion under your forehead. It's just a question ordinarily of not trying to squash that nose. So when you lie onto your side, sometimes that can vary a little bit from person to person, and you might find that laying with your arm out in front of you and with a little more support, so perhaps a cushion at this point rather than a small folded towel, or a rolled towel may be better instead, then that can be useful if you've got limitations in your shoulder movement, or if it feels uncomfortable for you to be up there. But if you're able to, then just use your arm in a lengthened position above you, and perhaps with a small folded towel between your head and your arm to help really take care of good alignment around the head and neck. Still think about the chin connecting towards the chest, so you have that little peach in mind the whole time, and if you don't like peaches, other fruits will work. Think about the shoulder placement. So again, this idea of staying open through the shoulders. When we start to do other exercises, perhaps a little bit more leg focused, it can be tempting to let the shoulders rise up to the ear. So we just want to keep checking in with here, keeping the shoulder relaxed away from the ear, wide across the front of the chest, and that will help help to maintain an optimized shoulder alignment. Now when we come towards the rib cage and the pelvis area, again sometimes it can be tempting to effectively flare the ribs and arch through the back. So softening the ribs, keeping them in line with the pelvis, and really trying to create a little sense of lift through the lower side is really important, and lengthening through the upper side of the waist whilst the pelvis stays stacked. So it's quite common when you start to do other movements and exercises that this area changes. It's what we most commonly see. So people close down at the top end of the pelvis and waist and then squash flat on the lower side. And in doing so, you're changing your pelvic and waist alignment, which doesn't enable your muscles to work as well in balance. So always a sense of lengthening, stacking, your hip headlamps facing forward straight ahead of you, and then opening through to the feet. Now of course the feet will change position, the legs will change position, but when you're exercising and you're considering your key elements, as you begin to move through the lower limb, you may find that the pelvis is wanting to rock back somewhat, so you'll notice this happening. Your knees may lift, you won't feel the same weight in the lower knee. So just a reminder to keep your pelvis stacked and lengthening, using light support through the hand as you need it. And sometimes when you're doing your Plus Pilates workout, it's helpful to use a little more support through the hand in order to help do a better job in the lower end of your body. But of course, knowing that you're doing that, it might well be that the upper limb is supporting quite hard because your lower limb is where you need more practice. And then finally for this video tutorial, we'll lie on our back. Now, in terms of this position, it can be known as various different things. Crook lying is one. We tend to refer to this as our rest position, which is admittedly slightly misleading because we rarely rest when we're here. But in your rest position, we want to be thinking about the alignment of the feet. So we tend to talk about train tracks. So visualize that you have train tracks running through your shoulders, your hips, your knees and your feet, and that you feel relaxed around your toes. Sometimes when things start to feel a bit more challenging, the toes start to lift and try to join in. So keeping relaxed around the feet is useful. Tracking the attention up through to the pelvis next, rocking through the pelvis in each direction as you have for the other positions. Sometimes if you imagine you have a little diamond from your tummy button through to your pelvis, and rocking and tilting that diamond, or perhaps you prefer to think of a tray of Maltesers that you're rolling back and forth and side to side so that you can create a balance through the buttocks and the pelvis. That should help your lower back to feel quite settled and your ribs to feel soft. But if when you lie on your back you feel like you're flaring, then just lift your head and shoulders and give them a little wriggle, and that will help you to sit a little bit lower into your rib cage, which will help your position and alignment. When we're looking at the shoulder blade placement and the shoulder in general, again this feeling of width across the front of the shoulders. And if you're somebody who's a little rounded, a little curly, it can be useful to have the palms upwards facing just to create a little bit more openness through the chest. And then finally, the amount of support that you will require into your head will vary dependent on your postural position. So for some people who are a little bit more curly and kyphotic, as we may refer to that, you're more likely to need a little bit more support under the head. So for Kate here, we only need a little slither of support, if any at all. But for others, we may need this head block or something similar in thickness, a cushion perhaps, to ensure that your head and neck is in optimal position. So we hope that you feel a little more equipped to be getting started with your Plus Pilates workout. Do check in with this video tutorial from time to time so you can revisit this. We will make reference to your key elements all the way along your workout, but it's just knowing that they're there and need to be thought about. Until next time, bye for now.